welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mavis Robinson, and today I'm really excited to welcome Bre Aflague. Bre, thanks for coming.
Hi, it's great to be here.
And this is going to be a little bit of a different show because we're starting right off, even though you're from Bourne.
Yes.
And we'll get into that a little bit, you're growing up, but we want to jump right into your professional expertise, which is all about the gypsy moth.
Yes.
And gypsy moths have been like the bane of our existence on the Cape for many years. You've done some studying, you've done some work, so if we can just start right off and tell us about this gypsy moth, what it is, and where did it come from, and what can we do about it is what we're looking to find out.
So the gypsy moth was an introduced species, so it's a non-native, and it's an invasive technically, and it basically was brought here by a French scientist who had this hope and dream of hybridizing the gypsy moth with a silk moth to have kind of a get-rich-quick scheme and make a silk industry here in the United States.
And when a French scientist, around what time of?
1910.
1910.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Okay.
So he worked with them in his lab for a number of years, and then it's known that I think in the late 1800s that they got out, and really probably earlier than that, but their damage was noticed first in the late 1800s.
Yeah.
And so they became a problem that they were trying to really scientifically solve at that point.
Was there sort of a ground zero for like where the initial infestation started?
There is, and it's actually Medford, Massachusetts.
Okay.
Yeah, and so
that's where this guy's
where,
lab was?
That was where the work was done,
Yep.
and that was where the primary or the center of the infestation existed.
Yeah. Now, did he ever successfully make silk? Do we have any gypsy moth silk garments anywhere?
Well, actually, the gypsy moths by themselves don't produce as much silk as you would hope, or I think as he would hope.
Yeah.
And so basically when they're a very tiny caterpillar, they make a strand, and this helps them really move around in the landscape and get a footing on a host tree.
Yeah.
And so that's the only phase of their life that they're actually producing a number of silk strands that could potentially be worthwhile, but it's not quite their biology as much as the silkworm itself.
Okay. So we recognize these gypsy moths, and they've been so prevalent the last couple of years. You see these giant tents and trees, but then also they're fluttering everywhere. They're, excrement gets everywhere. The actual caterpillars themselves are everywhere. It almost feels like, I remember back in the 80s there was a huge infestation, and then they went away for a little while, and then last year it was terrible again, and the beginning of this year. Can you tell us about that boom and bust cycle? Why does that happen?
Sure. So within the population dynamics, just the way that the numbers grow and kind of wane over the course of years, it's typical for gypsy moth to kind of have these boom and bust just, from a graphical standpoint. But there are a lot of factors that interplay and kind of play a role. And one of the main things, especially this year, we've seen the effects of a fungus called Entomophaga mamaja. Okay. And so
that's a funny name.
It is, right? I'll probably refer to it as EM going forward because it's a little bit easier, or the fungus.
Yeah.
And so the fungus needs the right conditions to propagate. It needs humidity and it needs warmer temperatures. And so when all of these weather features kind of align, there's a nice outbreak that controls most of the caterpillars.
Yeah.
And we've experienced that this year. However, the past 2 years were drought years, and the years that you're speaking of in the 80s were basically the peak of the infestation known.
Yep.
And that was really when this fungus took off, probably in the late 80s. And so from that point on, when the weather conditions were right, there was an epic control, again, much like the one we experienced this year.
Yeah.
So it definitely has a lot to do with the weather cycles and climatic factors.
Yep.
But also there are a lot of other things that come into play with different ecological components, and anything from acorn years and numbers of mice that would actually feed on pupa, or in other years there have been events where there's a virus called the NPV virus that infects these guys, but it only happens in cycles as well, and sometimes there's a span of 10 years in between cycles. So there are a number of things, actually, including parasitoids. So there are some little wasps out there that will lay eggs into these eggs, and also take care of the population. So anyway, long story short, a number of climatic factors as well as ecological factors interplay to kind of tell the story of how their populations will ebb and flow above and beyond the known graphical patterns.
Well, since we're talking about the life cycle and how different factors influence, you did bring a little illustration here of showing the gypsy moth life cycle and what they look like. Can you tell us a little bit about this display? And
of course. So we have the female here, and she is a white moth. She looks very different from the male moth, and this is called a sexual dimorphism. And so she, in another sense, is also very different from the male because she's flightless. Her body, as you can see, is quite large, and the reason why it is large is because it has to be equipped with the features to lay eggs and to produce an egg mass.
So she has wings, but she doesn't fly.
Exactly.
Does she do anything with those wings, or are they just kind of like penguin wings?
Very much. Okay. Yeah. And so European gypsy moths, the females have the ability to fly.
Okay. And
so there could be a potential for intermixing if, for example, it was intercepted, a European female was intercepted at a shipping yard or something, and then was able to hybridize potentially with a gypsy moth here, which would be a European gypsy moth.
So bring us back to like the basic, kind of like 7th grade science. Like, what is the life cycle? How do they start? How do they grow? What does that look like for us?
So if we were going to start from the beginning, we would reference this egg mass here in the middle. It's kind of a little blob-looking thing with a bunch of spherical eggs inside there. And the fuzziness that you see is actually born from the female's body. She'll take her legs and run them up and down and kind of detach all of these scales and fibers and protect the egg mass with that.
So those are like flakes from her body?
Yes.
Wow.
And so so that egg mass would be laid essentially now. So like mid-August or something like that. It will spend the whole winter wherever it's tucked away. And from there, it will actually hatch in the early May or so. But again, all of this is weather dependent, and so if the temperature is cool, if it seems to be a really wet year or something like that, these hatch times could be delayed, and development in general could be delayed. So
and when they hatch, and so what we might see now or in the next couple months on trees, where do they lay these eggs?
So it really depends on what happens, and in particular, it depends on density.
Okay.
So if there are lots and lots of caterpillars in the trees like we saw last year, there's not a lot of space, and space is a resource in the natural world. And so if for whatever reason there isn't a lot of space to kind of take a refuge and lay an egg mass, then you'll see them everywhere.
Okay.
And so I'm sure we've
like
all
in my
seen
outdoor
them.
shower last year.
Yes, on the back of car tires, on logs and things like that. And that's why, people really discourage moving firewood, and they also encourage looking at anything like including
so when you say moving firewood, you're talking about taking it from one area to the other, because you're going to move a whole bunch of eggs where
and potentially beetles and other things. So that's a campaign that's going on in Massachusetts and in the Northeast, because it's really important.
Yeah.
And gypsy moths also will lay an egg mass on a car tire, and say you go on a road trip, you're packing a pest.
Oh, right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and so in a weird way, there's this anthropogenic or this human-driven transport.
Right.
And in some cases, and I would venture to say most, which research does support, they are transported the longest distances by people.
Well, even the initial infestation came.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that can be a problem at times also. But back to the life cycle information. So then these small larvae in May are really kind of munching and crunching on all these leaves.
And let's talk about what those look like. They're little teeny tiny black caterpillars.
Yes.
Do they sometimes fly around on little webs or strings?
They do.
Okay.
So this is the beginning of their stage. They're called a first instar. And insect instars have to do with how many times they molt.
Okay.
So at this point, they've hatched from their egg and they haven't molted yet.
Yep.
So they're as, almost like a newborn baby, if you will.
Yeah.
And
not quite as cute, or depending on your perspective.
Definitely
Right,
not.
right.
And so their function during this phase of their life is to really get out and go, you know,
Okay.
and to move. And
And they
so
look almost like inchworms.
they
But they're
do.
black and not sort of fuzzy, but not,
They are.
Yeah.
And so they'll spin a little strand and they'll ride the wind.
Okay.
And
yeah.
so research supports also that that in places that are downwind, there are worse infestations. So it really depends on the directionality of the wind and the wind patterns in an area.
Yeah. And is that how the progression of this infestation generally moves naturally if it's not human?
Yeah. So there are a few different ways. And so one thing, I like to think about the adult male as being the most mobile life stage. And the caterpillars, they can get around. You know, they can do this ballooning behavior where they actually float to different trees and infest them. But they also can move as an adult, as a big caterpillar.
Yep.
And they can cover a lot of ground. They can consume up to 12 square inches of leaf material as a large late instar adult.
I can't picture what 12 square inches is. I mean,
It's a lot.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And so, as you know, and as we've seen in past years, the trees have been defoliated.
Yeah.
You
Now, so here's a question I have for you. I feel like in 7th grade or, ninth grade, I learned that they ate only oak leaves. Was that wrong information? Or is
No.
oak their preferred? Because they were eating every tree in the forest last year.
So oak is their preferred species. They like hardwoods in general. Like if all the oaks are taken, for example, they'll kind of branch out. And in years where density is really high, especially like the past 2 years, they will they'll take what they can get.
Yeah, okay.
And it's not necessarily the most nutritious source of food for them. It's not, even the best environment for them necessarily if they're continuing their life cycle on non-host trees. But in an ecological sense, they just complete the life cycle.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah. So if oak's not available, or if all his brothers and sisters have already eaten all the oak leaves, they'll do
Yeah.
maple. I feel
Sure.
like I've seen them on pine trees too. Is
Absolutely.
that okay?
Yeah. And that was shocking,
Yeah,
honestly.
yeah.
Sassafras trees, I mean, we've seen it all as far as them, branching out and going to different types of trees. I never thought that I would see them stray so far from their preferred host.
Right, right,
But
yeah.
it is out there. And so after they eat as much as they can eat, they go through anywhere from 5 to 6 instars. So they've molted
They're
5 or
molting.
6 times.
And are they leaving behind a little skin, or do we not really
a
see
visible
that?
one.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just basically so they can get bigger.
Yep,
And so then they will pupate.
And so they turn into those sort of big, fuzzy, awful-looking caterpillars, and those things move.
They do.
I mean, when I walk on the Cape Cod Canal, they're like running across. They're pretty fast for caterpillars.
And they need to be that fast.
Yeah.
So a lot of the times the caterpillars will be in the foliage and they do a lot of feeding up there. But you'll notice that you see a lot of them on the trunks of trees and then sometimes down and around. And the reason being because they like to get out of the sun. That's considered kind of a hostile environment for them.
Okay, yeah.
And so it's easier for them to kind of make their way down during the peak heat of the day and kind of find the places that make the most sense for them to be based on that temperature cycle of the day.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
interesting.
yes.
So they actually go up and down a particular tree a lot?
They do. And so then eventually they'll get to a place where they find kind of a refuge, if you will, a place where maybe there's a bark crevice or somewhere where they can nestle in and create a pupa. And so you can see the pupa here, and they're specific to both the male and female. The male individual, the adult itself, is smaller, as well as the pupa. And the female is quite large, and you can see that the pupa is also very large. And these structures, they would create their cocoon essentially in a protected area and then emerge from that. And what you'll see left behind is the shell of the pupal casing.
And how long do they live in that little pupa stage?
I know that they become a pupa around like late June.
Okay.
And they are emerging anywhere from mid-July and on.
Yeah.
So it seems like a few weeks or so.
Yeah.
It takes a while for them to kind of go through that developmental and morphological change.
And now when we talk about these gypsy moths, they are such a pest because of the defoliation. That's not the right term. The eating of the
defoliation.
all right,
Yes.
defoliation. And so, a lot of the efforts are to figure out like how to, minimize this population or really eradicate it, because it's an invasive pest. When you mentioned that fungus, say the name of the fungus again.
Entomophaga mamaja.
Entomophaga mamaja. I love it.
Yeah.
So is that why we saw all of those like full-grown caterpillars just sitting on
Keeled
trunks,
over.
just dead? Yeah.
And so that fungus, it actually consumes the gypsy moth caterpillar as a portion of its life cycle.
Okay.
And so when we have that humidity and that temperature like we talked about, it really festers, and it's able to find the gypsy moth and infect it. And really it's not finding it, it's making contact with it because there's such a density, and they actually physically shoot spores.
Oh, wow.
And that's their method of hopefully reaching caterpillars. But they also can be dormant in the soil for something like 10 years.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So it really lingers.
So now why, is the fungus also invasive? Where did the fungus come from?
Yeah, so the fungus was introduced from Japan, actually.
Okay.
And so gypsy moth were introduced in like 1889, and then 1910 and 1911 the fungus was released, but it didn't really take hold until the late 80s or so.
So this was an effort deliberately to chase. Oh, okay.
It's a biological control method.
Yeah. Now, and do they go after any other types of caterpillars or moths? Oh, wow.
Yeah,
so it's a really
it's
specific.
host specific.
Yeah,
which is really cool. In a lot of cases, especially when you're going to release something as a biological control agent, tons of research goes into it.
Right.
To make sure that it's not going to upset the ecological balance, much like the gypsy moth does here.
Right. Yep. Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So now let's talk about prevention once we get to the other stage, the moth stage, because you've brought something here, this little green thing that all the kids at Tuxet say, is that a birdhouse? But it's not a birdhouse, right?
No, it's not. This is a gypsy moth trap.
Okay.
And so this is, I feel, a very great control. It's a cost-effective method, and it's also easy for people to put out and check and monitor populations and other things of gypsy moth. And so that makes it the most really the most attainable method for us, at least, to do the research that we're doing to try and trap, as many adults as possible with the fewest resources that we have. Because actually, the town of Bourne has no forest health budget.
Oh, wow.
And so that's kind of sparked this community project through using gypsy moth traps, where we're working with GoFundMe and social media.
I noticed that on the Bourne residents Facebook page. Yeah. And then you're the person behind that?
Yes.
Okay.
So Bourne Gypsy Moth Project. So the GoFundMe link, that's basically, it's a backward slash, and then you can type that in and access the page itself and see what we're up to and where we are so far.
And now what will that, if people donate to that project, what will that go towards?
So the donations go towards buying traps.
Okay.
It's totally nonprofit. Every dollar that we get in that account is going to purchase traps that will go to the town of Bourne. And this year we worked with the Tuxet Trading Post. And Heritage Museum and Gardens, as well as the Four Ponds Conservation Area. So we had private donors this year, actually, which was really awesome. So we turned that into, something like 100 traps, and we were able to put those out and monitor them and see, basically what the infestation really looked like out there, and also what we were going to need to combat it more effectively.
So how does this trap work?
So this trap is wonderful, I will say. It's baited with a pheromone, so it's a sex pheromone.
Okay.
And this was isolated through research and employed to basically attract the males. And we mentioned before that the females are flightless, so they just kind of hang out on a tree. After they pupate and emerge, they are where they're going to be.
Okay.
And they can walk, they can move a bit, but not quite like they could as a caterpillar, So we put these traps out, and the pheromone inside of this trap smells just like a female to the male moth.
Okay, yeah.
And they'll go searching for this.
Okay.
And we actually have some footage of this.
You brought a video.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
And so there's a video where we actually have put this trap on a picnic table.
That's amazing.
And we set it out probably about a moment before we started doing the actual footage. And you can see that the male moths just flock to this trap.
Yes.
And this was early in the infestation in Tuxet Trading Post.
And this was last year's,
It was. And so it was a really bust year, and so tons of gypsy moth adults flocked to this trap. And you can see that it's quite effective.
Yeah.
You know, and
it's incredible watching those moths just like rush right over that it was only out there for a minute. I mean, it just,
right,
yeah.
right.
Yeah, yeah.
And then in a later video that we have where the trap is actually hanging in a tree, you can see not only the immediate effects of the pheromone attracting male gypsy moths to the trap, but you can also see the effect that we've had over just a week of having a presence in Uptuxet with these traps.
Okay.
And so the second video that we brought today has many fewer male moths flocking to this trap. And so you can see that we've done a fair amount of control in that area in order to be able to lessen the adult flight numbers and hopefully lessen the resulting egg masses that are fertilized.
But you do get to see that little slot where they kind of crawl in. And is that the goal? You get them to go in there, and then once they're in, is there something that kills them, or is it? Are they just not, okay.
There's a small insecticide strip in there. It's called Vapona, and it's a low dose and kind of a high volatilization thing, and so it will break down quickly, and it won't what we call biomagnify necessarily. So if the moths are being infected or technically dying because of this insecticide, it will probably embed in their tissues, but because it is so volatile, it will kind of go off into the atmosphere as opposed to being potentially ingested by animals that eat these insects.
Or like, or even ladybugs or other insects won't be affected. Yeah.
So it's pretty localized, you know.
So I'm laughing because when you came in here, I see these, you know, these really, they blend in a way, but you notice them out at Uptuxet.
Sure.
There's been such a difference between this year and last year, and I know some of the weather conditions are contributing. And I was sort of assuming like, oh, you're probably not catching much this year, but you actually brought a couple of
I did.
a couple of exhibits to show us that you're catching quite a bit this year. I thought it was wood chips, but tell us what that is.
This is a bag full of adult moths, and we trapped all of these at the Uptuxet trading post. And these are basically the product of 2 weeks of our traps being out there. So this is a whole gallon-sized bag of these moths, and as an individual, they're quite small, and they really don't weigh very much, you know. And so you can picture this whole bag being just totally full. And
it's kind of creepy how light it is too, and when you zoom in, you can really see how
it's a lot of individuals.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, you know, you can see this is what we're up to, and this is how well it works.
And you brought a photo from last night with just showing, you know, hands full of these gypsy moth carcasses. Yeah.
And that photo is actually from 4 ponds, and in my hands I have a whole like double handful of these moths, and that's about 1/3 of a trap catch for 2 weeks.
Wow.
There.
Wow.
So keep in mind when you look at this bag that the Uptuxet trading post has been controlled for the past 2 years with these traps, and also the other thing that's kind of interesting about this in particular is, you know, most professionals really felt as if the entomophagia fungus was out there and doing a great job, and it really did. We all saw the evidence of all the keeled over caterpillars on the trunks of trees, but I want to say that these individuals still survived and were still able to fly around and could have found a potential mate. You know, so although it's really tempting to say that we don't have a problem or an infestation going forward, I really do think that the density is such that there's a potential for the population to grow in years following, especially if we have a dry year.
Right.
So really as a preventative measure, even though we've had excellent fungus activity, we're still fundraising to put these gypsy moth traps out and to try and control the already controlled population. So the numbers are nice and low, and we want to kind of keep them there.
Yep.
You know.
Well, and I have to say, it's totally worth it. I mean, for you to have collected that just in 2 weeks, it's amazing.
I know. And this was not only a controlled year, but a year where we also acted with the biocontrol fungus.
Right.
So a combinatory effort, and we still have, you know, this many flying adults.
Yeah.
So, you know, we really did have a significant infestation here in the past 2 years, such that this type of control although it's not necessarily the most preferred method depending on what you're doing.
That's just Captain mentioning how much he really disliked the gypsy moths last year.
He does, yeah, and he thinks our bag is gross.
Yeah. But he does wants to remind me to mention to you that I had some frustration last year with trying to do my own version of this.
Okay.
So I went to, my brother-in-law helped me. He went to the hardware store to get the moth pheromone and came home with a whole bunch of stuff that really was only for the moths in those, cupboard moths.
Yes.
The ones that, are grain moths. Is it the same pheromone? Is one? No. Because it didn't work.
It's not.
Yeah.
And they have a sticky agent inside. It's kind of like a delta-shaped trap, right?
Yeah.
The one that you're
Yes,
describing.
yes.
And so that has a sticky pad inside.
Yep.
And that can be effective, but it's not necessarily attracting the moths. And
Right.
they're only going to get in there and hopefully get stuck to it. They could still escape, and also they could take up the whole surface area of that small sticky strip, and then that trap is a little bit less effective.
Yeah.
So that's not the best way to control. A number of methods that people do, anywhere from putting burlap around the trunks of trees, and even duct tape. And I've heard some really wild things that people are doing.
Vaseline.
Yes.
Yeah. Are there any of those effective or?
As much as I could say that they probably do work to a certain extent, especially in years where there's very high density of moths, they're not the most effective method. And sometimes this type of trapping isn't the most effective method, but ballooning larvae are really only traveling somewhere close to like 300 meters, and that's that's a heck of a move.
Yeah.
And so so they're not moving all that much. Adult caterpillars, as you know, they cruise around, they go pretty quick, but they don't move all that much either.
Right.
It takes a lot of energy for them to move and find another food source, but it's also a risk for predation, birds and other things that may have access to them, especially if they're kind of in the open and exposed.
Well, and when you talk about predation, I mean, noticeably the caterpillars don't seem to be appealing to very many things, but birds and bats eat the moths, correct?
Yes, they can.
Yeah.
And actually, we have a number of traps in our yard and have for a couple years, and so we have some birds that kind of lurk, and they like to hang out and actually nest near our traps because it's easy
pickings. Yeah.
Yeah, and so they're definitely aware of what we're up to too, and that kind of concentrates them in a way that helps them get a good snack out of it too.
Yeah. So now, if a person wanted to put some of these traps in their house, is that something that's accessible, or is this sort of something you have to be part of a government program or
Well, so my access to them has been initially through the United States Department of Agriculture lab on the Otis Air Force Base. That was where I was introduced to them and really saw, wow, you guys have something, this really works. And then it was really only available through like a government program. In some states, the state makes them available, but for the most part, they're kind of, they're a little bit hard to get.
Yeah.
And in the sources that you can actually purchase them, which are very limited, they're very expensive.
Okay.
And so it's kind of like you either buy them in bulk or through kind of research purposes, technically, which.
So really one of our best ways, just as individuals, to kind of impact the population is to support your GoFundMe. So
as shameless of a plug as that is, I'll be honest and say that, if we were able to get traction and get a lot of funding, we would love to be able to have a greater presence in Bourne and really accomplish being on the edges of conservation areas where the greatest good can be felt within the conservation area itself, and especially in the hiking areas, but also in abutting yards and properties, and if we were able to even gain more traction to the point where we had enough funding that we could ensure that we'd have enough traps to cover the town, it would be my goal and one of my dreams to also be able to say, if you donate X amount of dollars, we will provide you with a trap. Come pick it up assembled on this day and utilize it on your own personal property. And so the goal for this GoFundMe page is really to get that amount of money, to be at the point where we reach kind of a tipping threshold and have enough money to be able to do something that's a little bit more community-based than just reaching out to the hiking areas and other places where people really want to recreate. Because in the summertime, I know I hear a lot of complaints from people, and I feel this way myself. I don't ever want to go out during gypsy moth season necessarily, where there's either raining caterpillar frass coming from the forest, or you can potentially get these rashes from the caterpillars and coming in contact with them. or, you know, potentially encountering adults that sometimes cause people to have asthma issues.
Right, right, and they flutter everywhere. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I'm going to go to that GoFundMe and donate. I had seen it before, but I don't know why I was holding off. And thank you so much for this work that you're doing to help rid us of this menace. And,
Oh, well, thank you.
And thanks so much for sharing your knowledge here. I really appreciate you coming
It's
here
been
today.
a pleasure.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time on A Window to Bourne.